Okay, this is the 2014 edition of the MGW MT-82 shifter. We'll give a little summary of the components of the shifter. You have our new gold rear bushing bracket we've had out for about a year. Works really good. Comes with a street durometer bushing, and it also comes with a track durometer bushing that's harder for more firm shifts. The new design lower box, as you can see, it's got the removable lower plate so that you can actually mount the shifter to the car and service the bushings or disconnect it from the transmission without removing the shifter from the car. We have our new upper design that allows use of the factory OEM dust boot, which reduces costs, which we will be passing on to the customer this year as well. Put those to the side and we'll show you the kit. Each kit comes with the spring for the return to third and fourth actually, a container of the grease to lubricate the shifter, RTV silicone to actually mount the rear bushing bracket, Loctite for all the nuts and the studs, extra nylon lock nuts that go on the rear bushing bracket mounting just to keep it from vibrating loose. This is a base interior dust boot insert. This is for the leather boot if you have the base interior with the large thumb-shaped shift knob. If you have a Boss 302 or the upgraded aluminum knob interior, you would not use that. And it also comes with the sound pad and Dynamax Extreme to cut down on noise, vibration, and heat. And then here's also the heat shield kit, which includes the stainless steel polished heat shield and the thermal padding. And that's the whole kit. Okay, here's all the tools you will need to install the MGW MT-82 shifter. We need 2 extensions. Now we have 2 8-inch extensions, but actually if you can get one 10-inch extension, that's just fine. We prefer you use a 1/4-inch ratchet, not a 3/8 drive, because the 1/4-inch is smaller and allows you to get into the side of the shifter to mount the swing arm a little easier. These 2 sockets need to be deep well. You have a 1/2 inch and you have a 10 millimeter. These have to be deep well sockets, and we'll show when we're under the car. These 2 sockets we prefer not to be deep well. That is the 7/16 and this is a 3/8. So we have a 10 millimeter deep well, a 1/2 inch deep well, a 7/16 standard, and a 3/8 standard. We also have a 1/2 inch open end wrench on one side and a closed box ratcheting type on this side. This is very important that you get a ratcheting style for the 1/2 inch. You also need a 3/4 if you're going to install one of our MGW shift knobs with the deluxe jam nuts. It does not have to have the ratcheting part because we will only use the open end. We have a pair of scissors, and we have a 3/16 T Allen wrench, and that's the entire kit. Make sure your Mustang is on a level surface. Apply the parking brake. Make sure the vehicle is in neutral. Take off the factory shift knob. Pull up on the boot a little bit. Make sure it breaks free from the little indentions that are on the bottom side of the boot that goes into the top of the shifter shaft. Open the center glove box. Open your cup holder. You want to do a combination of reaching up with your left hand and pulling up on the lid of the cup holder, and with your right hand curling your fingers up underneath the console and just lift up. Then work yourself to the front, lifting up and popping the tabs carefully. Try not to break them. Get the boot clear from the shift knob shaft. Lift it up about this far, reach up underneath, and pop this switch just by pushing on this little tab, and it'll come right off. If you have the cup holder ambient lighting option, you'll also have to unhook that to get this to move to the side. You just want to wiggle this little connector there. It's on one of the threaded studs there that just holds it in place. And then there's another spline connector there. Just pull that straight out like that. Move this out of the way. Lift up the back portion of the sound deadening material, and then lift up the sound pad from the factory. Make sure you remember which way it was oriented and set that aside. You will reuse this. Now you want to pull on the boot around the circumference and get it pulled up off of there, and then lift up there, and the boot should come off. And we will be reusing the dust boot as well, so put that to the side. With the vehicle in neutral, take your 3/8 socket and one of your extensions on your ratchet and go ahead and remove 3 of the bolts. The one here in the passenger rear location, this bolt we will have to remove after we lower the back end of the shifter from underneath the car so that we can move it over. There's not enough room to get to it from here. It's actually underneath the console area. But you're going to want to remove this one, and the other one. Okay, now we're underneath the Mustang. We are on a lift, but you can also use jack stands. First thing we need to do under here is to remove the 6mm hex nuts on the rear support bracket. You're going to use your 10mm deep well socket and either a 16, 12, or 10 inch minimum extension on your ratchet. Okay, once you have removed both of the 6mm hex nuts, one on the left, one on the right side of it, you're going to grab the bushing bracket and pull down on the whole shifter assembly and slide it down off of the 2 threaded studs. On the passenger side, there may be a little panel nut that works like a spring nut to hold it in place. They do that for assembly purposes. You may need to reach up on the top side of the rear bracket and pull down on that as you pull down on the whole shifter area. Once we're done that, we'll pull this off of the rear boss there and pull out the rear OEM bushing bracket. Okay, we're going to take our 3/8 socket and we're going to remove these 3 bolts on the driver's side of the shifter that connected to the swing arm that's connected up in the front of the transmission. You will not reuse these bolts. You're going to want to hold the shifter in place with your right arm when you remove the 3rd screw, just so the bolt can come out straight and it doesn't jam. And then you just lay the shifter on the drive shaft. Okay, now we're back up inside the vehicle and we're going to get this last bolt here. You want to hold on to the shifter with your right arm while you unscrew this last screw. Pulling up on it, and when it comes out, the shifter should pop right out into your hand. There we go. Grab that bolt and then work the shifter up out. And there's the factory shifter. Want to take these little plastic pieces out, just pull them straight up. Set them aside. You have one there. And you can either take this one out or you actually can leave it in because the rod will come forward, but we'll go ahead and take it out as well just to get it out of the way so it doesn't fall up underneath the car. And you just want to lift up on the rod and you can pull it out, and then you want to kind of manipulate the rod so that it lays up underneath of, there we go, and just let it hang down, and then we're just going to work the factory shifter up out of the hole. And you'll see one of the bushings in the back stays on it, the box back in there. However, you want to reach down and grab a hold of your linkage rod, and you'll see that on the front of it, make sure you take this off. We've had a lot of people forget that front bushing. It's split, so it just pulls right off the front side of the cup on the rod. If you don't take this off, when you try to shift front to back, it's going to jam up against the shifter box and you won't engage the gear fully. So make sure you take that off. And you want to go ahead and just put your factory stuff back together. The one in the rear goes with the little flange facing the back. Stick the OEM bushing in there. And this one goes the opposite way facing the front. You can see when they're put together, that is your flange that the dust boot that's on the linkage rod snaps around. Okay, before we put the lower box in, like we talked about at the desktop, we're going to take that Dynamax Extreme and cut 2 pieces. As you can see, about the same size, 1 by 2 inches. We've already affixed them on here. You see one of them we stuck right here on the side support arm. Move that out of the way. And the other one you can see is right here behind the silver knuckle universal joint on the bar right there. So again, these 2 pieces just wrap around there, quell some of the vibration. And we're going to go ahead and apply the supplied Loctite to each of the nuts. These are the 4/4 20 nuts for the side support arm. And these are the 4 5/16 18 nuts that affix the gold lower plate onto the lower box. Okay, we're going to go ahead and put the lower box in. This is the main portion. What we're going to do is we're going to slide it up onto the passenger side of the drive shaft. You go with the rear support pins first. You'll slide it up and then you'll basically maneuver it that way so the pins face the rear of the car. The studs that hang out, you'll notice up in the drive shaft here has a little indentation there. That's where you want to put it in, right in this area here, to give it clearance. And we want to go ahead and take the linkage arm for right now and move it to the driver's side, fold it away all the way over to the side, and push the side support arm all the way up. Then we'll slide the box. It'll rub the drive shaft a little bit, no worries there. We'll bring it up and around, and then we'll pull down on the side support arm a little bit, and we'll actually get all 4 set screws lined up and then slide it right on top, and you can let it go there. It hangs right on top of the 4 studs. Okay. Then we're going to take our 4 1/4 inch split lock washers and go ahead and put your right arm there and just hold it lightly just so it doesn't fall off the studs while you lay these lock washers in. To be honest with you, it's easiest to just do the bottom 2 first and go ahead and get 2 of the nuts started. That way you know that that box won't fall off the side swing arm. Once you get those 2 started, then you can go ahead and grab the last 2 lock washers on first again. Okay, now we're going to take the 3/8 socket off and put our 7/16 socket on, our 1/4 inch drive ratchet, and we're going to go ahead and tighten up those 4 1/4 20 nuts. You want to get nice and snug on them, but don't go crazy on them. It's only a 1/4 inch diameter stud. You don't want to snap that stud off or strip it out. If it feels like it's binding or anything, just be careful. You want to make sure you pull the box up flush up against that side support arm before you start driving the nuts up flush. If it's on there cocked, you could take a chance of snapping one of the studs off or causing a indentation in the aluminum box. We're going to show how you install the linkage transmission arm into the MGW lower box. We will also show this underneath the vehicle as well, but I just wanted to show you on this desktop so you can get a clear idea of how the bushings are assembled. As you orient the box, the 2 pins are face the rear of the vehicle. So as this turns upside down, that would be how it would be from the top view of the car. So we're going to flip it over to access it. Here's the linkage rod taken out of the vehicle. See, it's got a rubber bellows to protect the grease area, and that's the pivot cup. that pivot cup would actually orient like that, facing down, because it would be facing up when you flip the box over. All right, the first thing you want to do is you want to inspect this rod. We've had a lot of problems from the factory with weld splatter and slag on this rod. So before you do anything, and when you're underneath the car, you can actually just move this. This thing is an articulating arm. You can get over to the side and bring it down, get a little flashlight, and feel with your hands and make sure you don't feel any hard metal weld splatter. If you do, you need to file it or sand it, because it really can wreak havoc on the bushings, both the OEM bushings or the MGW bushings. This one we've cleaned off, it's nice and smooth, so we're ready to go. All right, the first thing you want to do is, you can see the front bushing is actually split in half. You have to do that because there's no way to slide it onto the rod with the pivot cup welded in place. The rear bushing doesn't need to be split because you can just slide it right in. But the front bushing, as you'll see, is also not symmetrical like the rear bushing. It has a large flange. The purpose of that flange is to allow the rubber boot to have something to affix to. So you want to make sure that when you put it on, that you put it on obviously with the large flange pointing towards the front of the vehicle where the rubber boot is, not towards the pivot cup area. So we're going to take one half and put it like that. We're going to take the other half and do that. And just for ease of assembly, what we do is we provide you with a small little zip tie. So you take the zip tie while you're holding it in place, and there's a little groove we provide right there. And we'll lay this down on the table here. And you just want to be careful, and this is why we provide this, because it's a little cumbersome to try to hold the two pieces together while you're trying to put everything in. So just carefully make sure they're lined up. Now it's very important, we are not tightening this zip tie. I'm going to repeat that again. Do not tighten the zip tie. You do not want to jam and press these two halves against that rod. We're only getting it there so it doesn't fall apart. So we can go just a hair tighter, but you still want to be able to easily maneuver it back and forth and actually lift it up like this. As you can see, it's loose. When it's assembled into the box, it can't move at all. It is completely trapped all the way around the circumference of the bushing. So for right now, like I said, all we want to do is just have it there. That way when you're working with it, it doesn't fall apart on you. And we'll get a pair of scissors, and you can do this now, or you can do it after you get everything assembled, but we're going to go ahead and just snip that off of there just to get it out of the way. Okay, another thing we'll show underneath the car as well, but I'm going to show you right now. It's a little clearer with the lighting. A little piece of the Dynamax Extreme. You provided a full 10 by 10 sheet. You take one little piece about that size, about 1 inch long by about 2 inches wide. You peel off the backing. Right behind here, in front of this large silver knuckle, is where you just want to affix along the circumference like that. Just cuts down on some of the transmission vibration going back into the shifter box. So there we go. Next thing we want to do is we need to split the bushing. This is the same bushing that's on the rear, but again, because it's, you know, in front of the welded cup, we have to split it in order to wrap it around it. So you just take a very sharp pair of scissors or a razor blade, and you just want to cut that across like that. And it really is not critical, but just as a rule of thumb, I don't want to have the joint, you know, or the split of the rubber bushing to be in line with the split of the white bushing. Just kind of move them about 90 degrees. We got that split there, and we got that split there. Okay, we'll put the rear bushing on here, and we'll have, now the box will be like this. The pins would be facing the rear of the car, and you would position this so that this is facing downward, because that actually down is actually up when we're underneath the vehicle. So you want to carefully rotate the bushings and get them seated inside both sides like that. And you just want to hold on to it with your hand right here, and you just take the gold piece and fit it in like that. Now when you're underneath the vehicle, gravity will be working against you, so make sure you hold one of your fingers against it. You'll take one of the smooth washers, one of the lock washers, and one of the Armor Code hex nuts. Now this will have some blue Loctite on, which we'll show later. And once you get one tight, hand tight, or go ahead and snug it up, then you don't have to worry about it. You can let go of it. Gravity won't knock that out. But make sure it's snug, because even if you have it on but it's all the way at the end, if it pulls out, the bushings might unseat. So make sure you have it like that, and then go ahead and do all 4 of them. Okay, this is the step where we talked about earlier. You want to carefully examine the surface of the rod, both behind and in front of the welded cup. It's welded. You can see the huge weld joint right there. You want to make sure you don't have any specks of slag, rough spots in metal there that can damage the bushings. This one feels very smooth. You can see we actually sanded that off on a previous installation there. So it feels really smooth, and we can proceed to the next step. Here, as we talked about earlier, this is one of the Viton bushings for the front support. Just want to take a pair of scissors, cut it long ways so that it opens up. And then we're going to take the 2 halves of the front bushing. As you can see, again, it's got the larger flange on one end, smaller flange on the other. 2 equal halves like this. We're going to put it on the front of the linkage rod. And as you can see, the larger flange is up here where the rubber boot is. And we're going to snap that rubber boot on after we get everything put in. So you just hold it there with your fingers. You take the little zip tie that's provided. And this is where it's actually helpful if you have somebody to help you do the install. They can hold it. But as you can see, it can be done with one person. Now again, you can see this groove. There's a little groove here that we made for the zip tie. It goes right in there. You want to make sure that you hold it there, and you just want to slowly bring it in. Again, I emphasize, do not pinch this zip tie tight. You're not using it to clamp it against the rod. The design of the lower box takes care of that for you. All you're doing is keeping it there so that it doesn't fall out of your way. And we can get a little tiny bit tighter just so it stays, but again, make sure it moves around. And really, if you want to, you can go ahead and bring the rubber boot around it too and snap it around just like that. Okay, and then we're going to take the little rubber sleeve that we split apart, and we're going to wrap it around that diameter, and again, rotate it so that it does not match with the same joint. It's not critical, but it's preferable like that. And we'll go ahead and take our scissors and snip off this piece of the zip tie. Okay, the next step is to go ahead and slide the gold rear bushing bracket onto the back post like that, and then line up the holes with the studs, push it up flush. And the first thing you want to do is take the 2 hex nuts that you took off of the OEM unit and put them on first. Okay, we're going to use our 10mm deep well socket again. And we're going to go ahead and bring these up. Now we're only going to bring these up just snug because we actually have to drop them back down a little bit later when we want to seat the inner rubber dust boots. So we're just going to bring them up here for right now, both sides, and just get them snug. Now we're ready to put the gold lower plate on. It does not matter which way you put it on, it is symmetrical. Okay, now that you have the front bushing on, just slide the rear bushing on. Okay, we want to just work the linkage rod up inside the half moon cutouts in the main part of the body. Just slide your rear bushing back. And make sure both of them go up inside. There we go. Okay, and then you just want to kind of hold it in place with one hand, and you'll take your gold plate, you slide it up. go. You just hold it with one thumb and grab your smooth washer first. Hold that in place. And a split lock washer. And then one of your 5/16 armor coat lock nuts. Once you have this seated, make sure you don't let go of it until the first one is flush. Don't get tight on it yet, but just bring it all the way flush so that the gold plate cannot drop down even a little bit, because you risk having those bushings fall out of their seats. Okay, once you get it snug, your hand's free. Now these two bolts here, you should be able to get your 1/2-inch socket and your extension and tighten those. The ones on the driver's side though, there's not enough room to get your ratchet and extension through there, so that's what the 1/2-inch ratcheting box wrench is for, to tighten up the nuts on this side. Okay, here you can see after we get everything installed up underneath the car, we took the rest of that Dynamax Extreme and we cut a few strips behind the gold rear bushing bracket and along the sidewalls, and just affixed it to the body of the car. It just cuts down on vibration. It also absorbs some of the resonance from the exhaust in the drive shaft. Okay, now we're ready to put the top shifter base on, and first thing we need to do is pop the OEM pivot cup off of the OEM upper base. Here's the MGW unit, and just be very careful, push it on straight. Make sure it's snug, but it swivels freely. Okay, here's the MGW supplied grease. Take a generous portion and put some inside the pivot cup. And go ahead and put some on the front part of the rod and the rear part of the rod. And then we're going to go ahead and put a little bit inside the little spring hole right there. Here's the return spring with the two spring caps. Apply a little bit of grease on the end of one cap, slide it inside the spring, and then spread the grease along the coils of the spring. Put a little bit on the other end, and then put the other cap in there like that. And then carefully hold your finger there so the cap doesn't fall off, and put that inside the spring hole right there. And then this is a good idea to, again, have a helper, because what you want to do is, first of all, make sure that the car is in neutral. If you inadvertently push the linkage rod and got it out of gear, it's either in 3rd gear or 4th gear, you can just take a little wrench and pry on it lightly and pop it into neutral. You want to take your finger here, you have 2 bolt counter bores, and then you have the center hole is for the spring. So I kind of hold my finger right on there and kind of guide it, and you got to kind of feed it in there by feel, and then bring it down like that. And if you hold this with one hand hard, because you're compressing the spring, and you can have somebody hand you these 4 button head cap screws one at a time, so you can start screwing them into the base while you're holding it down. Okay, when you start the one screw in the front here, as soon as you get it fairly close, you want to bring it up snug, and then just back it off a little bit, and then you can go ahead and push the thing down into 4th gear. Gives you a little extra room with the T-handle to get in and put the other bolt in. Then you can push it up into 3rd gear. Do the same thing for the rear bolts. Okay, once we have the shifter mounted to the lower box, we have to set the reverse lockout for the 1 to 2 gate and the reverse. This step is not optional. This step is absolutely mandatory. There was a lot of misunderstanding with the last video, people thinking that this step was not necessary. This step is very necessary, or you will not get a good 1 to 2, and you could get lockout doing hard shifts going into second. This car, as you can see, is a little rough. You can see it hanging up going into first gear. That's because the distance from this pin to this plate is not set correct from the factory. We can't set every car exactly the same, so it's very easy to adjust. You take the same 1/2-inch ratcheting box wrench that we installed the lower box. You just break the nut loose on the passenger side. You take a small Allen wrench. There's a little cross hole in the pin. And I'm going to try screwing it in about a turn, maybe half a turn, 3/4 of a turn, and see if that gets better. Much better. You can see, no hang up. If it got worse, that means you would need to go out towards the driver's side. But in this instance, it's much smoother. And I may even go a little bit more just to see if that makes it better or worse. It feels like it needed to come back out just a hair. Okay, once you get it where you want it, you keep the Allen wrench inside the pin, and you lock it back into place there. Get snug on it. And as you can see, nice and smooth now. Okay? Make sure you do this step before you move on to doing anything else. Now we're ready to put the OEM dust boot back on. As you can see, it's got 2 arrows. Those arrows are to be pointed at 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock. Don't turn it 90 degrees. It's symmetrical front to back, so it doesn't matter which way. Just make sure the arrows point front to back like that. You want to take the underside of the boot, and you want to get all 8 fingers inside it, and you stretch it out like a bass mouth. You pull it out really hard, and you stretch it around the entire boot, including the reverse plate. Just take your time. And you actually want to snap it around the little groove that's on the MGW lower boot, or lower base, sorry. You can actually reach in the inside, kind of pull it out also. Reach your fingers inside here like this. Make sure that you have it all the way around, and then just feel around. And if it's not quite in, just pull on the boot. It's very important that you get that thing seated. Bottom here a little bit more. Okay. Okay, we got it. Put it back in neutral. Rotate it a little bit, just make sure the arrows are pointing front to back. Then you want to work the lips of the boot around the shifter. And into the oval cutout in the body of the car. And you can use a little trim tool, but be careful using anything sharp like a screwdriver. You don't want to tear the boot. But it keeps popping out of neutral, you just pop it back up. Okay. There, once you get it all the way around, it'll kind of seat itself, and then you want to just pull down on the top until that's flush like that. Okay, now we're going to inspect the lower boot flange right here. You see how it's seated and pulled perfectly around the outside. Now if this was all bunched up or not pulled flat like this, what you may have to resort to do is lower that gold rear bushing bracket on those 2 nuts like I talked about earlier. That's why we didn't get really tight on them. You could back them down to the bottom of the studs, and that would lower the entire unit and let you push that boot in a little bit more, but it's actually seated all the way around flat now. So we're gonna go ahead and tighten those nuts up a little bit more. Not too tight, you don't wanna break those studs off or strip those threads. And that's why we also have these nylon lock nuts that are also 6mm that we're gonna put over top of those two just to keep them from vibrating loose. Okay, once we have determined that the boot is seated correctly, we're gonna go ahead and just tighten these two 6mm nuts in the rear bushing bracket a little bit more. And we're only gonna get, snug tight. We're not gonna go crazy with it, wrist pressure. And then we're gonna take the MGW supplied 6mm nylon lock nuts and we're just gonna put them on top of those nuts and tighten them up against them. That'll just keep those nuts from vibrating loose while the car is in motion. One thing to keep in mind when you're tightening the nylon lock nuts is do not let the deep well socket go around both nuts at the same time, because you'll jam the one that's already snug too tight and you may strip it. Back it off a little bit and make sure that you're only turning the nylon lock nut, because you could easily get them both lined up with the flats and go over both of them and it'll feel like it's tight, but you're actually only tightening one of them. Okay, we're going to install the heat shield next, and the two slits here, this tab will actually be bent down when it's installed. These two slits will actually be facing the front of the vehicle. We're going to install it from the passenger side, so it's going to go up just like this. You want to install the heat shield from the passenger side. You slide it up around the drive shaft, and then you look for the 4 studs hanging down and push it up, hold it in place, and get the nylon lock nuts, get 1 or 2 of them started, and then you can let it go. Now, just like the gold plate on the lower box, 2 of these nuts you can get with the ratchet and the socket extension. The 2 on the driver's side, you'll have to use the 1/2-inch ratcheting box wrench for those, because there's not enough room with the drive shaft in place. Okay, once the heat shield's put in, this is another very important step that a lot of people miss or they skip over and they don't think it's necessary, but it is absolutely mandatory that you push down and pry this lip down a good 30 to 45 degrees. Don't let it obviously come all the way down and get close to the drive shaft, but you want to turn it about 45 degrees. That's because it has to clear the big silver square universal joint there. So if you don't do that, you could have some interference there when you try to shift. Okay, we're ready to go ahead and put everything on top of the shifter and get the center console put back in place. Here's the MGW supplied sound plate. It will go on first. It has 2 slits for the rear of the car that go over the 2 studs. So you work the oval around, push that down into there, get that down in there, and make sure you push this thing flat so that it keeps out the noise and the heat as good as it can. Okay, then you have the OEM one, and it goes in the same way it came off. And you work the 2 holes through there as well, push that up into there. And then you take the rear part of the blanket and you work it through there, and you have this little plastic fastener, and it pushes down on top of that stud. And then on this side, you have this little fastener here that pushes down on this stud, holds this wire in place. And then you have this piece that goes inside this hole. Okay, and this is your switch for your center console. Take your center console and plug it in. And always pop the trunk just to make sure it's got a good connection. and then work the 2 pins. You see the blue tabs there in there. Now before you push down, make sure that you put the boot through here like that so it doesn't tear the boot. Snap it together, close the console. And then because this is a base interior boot, which has the large opening for the stock knob, if you decide to use an aftermarket knob, we provide this adapter piece that goes inside there, fills that hole nicely. So that looks really good. We're going to opt to use our MGW Gripper Knob. Comes with a GT, Pony, Boss 302, or the gear shift pattern. Go ahead and screw it on. Screw it all the way down, and you want to actually compress that rubber piece just a little bit, not too much, just so it's snug so it doesn't vibrate. Orient the logo. Then we're going to take our 1/8 inch Allen wrench that's provided with the gripper knob, and there's a small set screw at 12 o'clock. And you just want to tighten it up very nicely. Keep it from rotating. Okay, once you're done, just want to check the gears. Again, 1 to 2 should be nice and smooth. If it still feels like it's hanging up, you may have to go back, push that boot down, and adjust that reverse lockout plate. But that's why it's very important that you do that before you button everything up. Makes it a lot less hassle. Shifter operates in reverse the same way the factory one does, with the exception of an option that the factory doesn't have. Now you can obviously just push straight down, over, and up to engage reverse, just like factory. But we have a better idea, and that is to push it over, just straight over to the left, and then you can actually just roll your wrist, because our reverse lockout plate actually has a ramp instead of a straight slot. So you can just push it over and just roll your wrist down, and it goes right into it. That way there's no question that you popped into reverse. And you can see with our heavy springs, it pops out of reverse very quickly. A lot of competitor shifters, people are complaining about them getting hung up in reverse. Doesn't happen on ours. Another method that you want to make sure you use that is not the same as the OEM, you use that. Hear that little clicking? That is that hardened plate and pin. Goes right into first gear. When you're ready to load up into a second gear shift, you want to actually push that thing up against that plate and use it as a guide. That way you don't accidentally go into fourth gear, because the springs on ours are much stronger than the OEM. So you just lightly do it, pull straight back, and go right into second gear. Like that. Second to third, let the shifter do all the work. Do not try to force it over into third. You'll end up overshooting third and hit the wall between 3 and 5. Just push with the back of the butt of your palm, straight up, goes right into third for you. Back to fifth. Even fifth gear, you do not need to dogleg it. You just push straight away from you, it goes right into fifth. Fifth to fourth, just grab the knob. Do not try to manipulate it. Straight back, the springs snap it right into fourth gear for you. Okay, that concludes the 2014 revision of the MGW MT-82 shifter. If you have any questions, please call us. Our phone number is listed on the website. Our website is mgwltd.com.